We are live. Um, it is so nice to meet you virtually, Alexandra. This is Alexandra Hudson. She is the author of The Soul of Civility, a speaker, the founder of the Civic Renaissance. You have tens of thousands of followers around the world. And I'm so happy to have you on How She Led to Me, which is a show about a weekly show I do about the women who have shaped us. But first, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your work and what you do and why you think it's so important today. It's very unique what you're doing.
Thank you. I also want to hear a little bit about your story. So I hope we can pivot to you and hear about your books and forthcoming book and TV show and all this fun stuff. And I'd love to hear how you would describe what I do and why you think it's unique. Because I know what I do. I think it's interesting. I think it's important. But curious to hear it kind of from what you've gleaned. I know you said you've read a little bit about it. So I wrote this book, The Soul of Civility, which is about how to flourish across difference. And I spent a decade of work, a lifetime of thought, immersed and distilling the timeless principles of human flourishing. And I scoured thousands of handbooks and etiquette books and self-help manuals and this whole genre that we don't really have anymore, that was a really prominent genre of books and literature called mirrors for princes. These are what wise leaders would write, these books, and give them to future leaders, hoping that it would help them be wise and just leaders. So I scoured that whole genre from ancient Egypt, from the Middle East, from antiquity, and I distilled it into a mere 412 pages as a handbook for leaders today to navigate divided times. And there's no question we live in divided times. There's no question we are defined by fracture and loneliness. And
Mhm.
yet, core part of my argument is that it's not just division and difference that is our crisis today, it's a crisis of dehumanization. We insufficiently appreciate the profound gift of being human in ourselves and
Hmm.
in others. And that's the crisis that to me is, it belies all other crises and is more significant. And that's really specifically what my work tries to overcome. When I go into communities, when I partner with leaders, I give them a shared vocabulary and and I want to help them build in their community that shared appreciation of what it means to be human. I call my book a humanistic manifesto, and helping us appreciate that profound dignity and beauty and individuality that we all have. Even and that's what civility is. It's not just politeness. It's what we owe the other by virtue of our shared humanity.
Hmm.
Not just those we like, not just those we agree with, not just those who can do things for us in return, but the person we don't like, the person we don't agree with, the person who didn't vote for us, the person who um, will never be able to repay us. That's the test of true civility. That's what we need to revive in our moment, more than just etiquette and manners and niceness. Those may have its place, especially in the classroom and with younger students. I'm a mom of three babies, three kids. My kids are 6, 4, and 1, and it grates me that they don't ask me kindly and politely in the nice way. And I will say, no, let's try again. Like, of course that
Yeah.
matters, especially younger. But, when I speak to older and mature audiences, I'm like, look, the form is not enough. Let's focus on the substance, not just be content with tone policing and what we do and what we say. That's the stuff of politeness. Let's cultivate the disposition of civility, the disposition of the heart that sees our fellow human beings as our moral equals, worthy of respect, full stop. And that's what civility is, the art of human flourishing, the respect we owe to others, more than just politeness. And that's what I work to promote and build cultures of alongside leaders right now. I'm not just a speaker, not just an author. I call myself a civic architect, where I co-create with leaders to build lasting cultures. As a student of history, I think in decades, I think in centuries, and it's so easy to think in terms of quarters and 24-hour news cycles and
Yes.
elections. And so I think it's a good ballast, a good antidote to be grounded in the long narrative of human history.
Wow. That's a big task, isn't it, today when we have such a divided country and people can't seem to agree on much of anything right now. But it's kind of what you're saying is making me think of the golden rule. It's not What you're talking about is not faith-based, right? It's civics-based, but there is a grounding in some religious beliefs in what you're saying, right? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. That's basically, and having basic empathy for people.
Yeah, and I'm open about my faith. I'm a Christian, and I think it's only intellectually honest to share with people kind of my foundation, my intellectual priors, my orientations to the world. And yet, I am intentional, and I frankly found it fascinating to see a certain core of human wisdom about the timeless principles of human flourishing that have surfaced time and time again across time and across place. And sometimes there was this sort of intellectual lineage where people traveled, they would bring books home, bring ideas home, this cross pollination of ideas. For example, I opened my book with the oldest story in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the oldest book in the world, also in this Mirror of Princes genre called The Teachings of Ptahhotep. It was an ancient Egyptian manual written by an advisor to the ancient pharaoh for the pharaoh's son. And it's fabulous because it's like basically kind of the, all this conventional wisdom that we learned in kindergarten that we have to be reminded of today that
Mhm.
is time and time again surfaces in self-help books or even Miss Manners columns, that you read about all the time. It's like, don't gossip, don't be nice to people just when you need something, be generous, it's just like timeless.
Yeah.
Don't slander people, don't malign their reputation behind their back. And I love that. But the ancient Greeks loved Egypt. We know the ancient Greeks went to Egypt. There was this cross pollination of they really revered ancient Egyptian culture and civilization. So it's possible that they brought back a copy of the teachings of Ptahhotep home, or that like it was internalized in them, and they brought it back, and that influenced the West that way. So sometimes there was that cross pollination. Sometimes it was just thoughtful people observed the human experience and said, "What works when it comes to life together? Let's do more of that. What doesn't
Mhm.
work? Let's do less of that." And that's
Mhm.
fascinating to me, that people can come to truths independently, independent of
Mhm.
scripture, of revelation, because the human condition doesn't change. Human nature does not change. So I would say, yeah, I draw from many ethical, philosophical, religious traditions to point to this core of human wisdom that is fundamentally humanistic in nature, that civilization itself, human flourishing, not to mention, democracy is such a novel
Yeah.
thing in human history, depends on this fundamental basic respect for the dignity and personhood of others.
um, to get to the theme of the show, because I could talk to you forever about this because it's fascinating. But I think that there must have been something in your life, and perhaps a person who inspired you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a woman, although I think mothers, grandmothers, friends, aunts always play a huge part in our shaping who we are. Who inspired you to really go down this path and pursue this kind of thinking and research that you do?
Yeah, I'll answer that twofold. My mother is called Judy the Manners Lady. So she's this expert in manners and etiquette. And, people often say to me, "Your mom was the manners lady and you wrote a book on civility, like keeping up the family business." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Like my work is like a response to her." It's like because growing up, my mother would say, set the table just so and shake hands just so, like very unbelievably gracious and hospitable, always welcoming outsider to insider, stranger to friend, and just like going above and beyond, seeing the person who was lonely and welcoming them into the fold. Our home growing up was this revolving door of strangers, of newcomers to our community. We had homestays from dozens of countries around the world, and she's so embodies that spirit. The soul of true civility,
Mhm.
as I define it throughout my book. Yet she also cared about manners. And I don't like rules. I don't like being told what to do. And so my mother would say, "Set the table just so, shake hands just so." And I would be like, "Why, mom? Like give me a moral, philosophical justification." My 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 year old self. And she would just like be like, "Just do it." A logic that didn't satisfy me then, and kind of put me on this lifelong path of inquiry about the origin and the purpose of our social norms and why we do
Hmm.
things the way we do them. And, how do we know
Hmm.
when a norm how we've outgrown it and it no longer serves its original purpose? What about when a norm is explicitly harmful? Like norms
Hmm.
that say this is where you go to the bathroom, this is where you drink from the water fountain, and this is where you do. If you have certain skin colors,
Exactly.
like those were laws, but they were also norms before and after they were laws. And so how do we know, how do we question them appropriately and know when to evolve and adapt and rebel against them? I always rebelled against all norms, but I generally followed them because my mom promised they would lead to success in work and school and life. And she was right until I found myself in federal government. And so
Huh.
I served in DC 2017, 2018, and I was kind of very optimistic, very hope filled. I was 23 years old. It was like my big break. I love beauty, goodness, and truth. I love ideas. I love the
Hmm.
light of the mind. And I couldn't wait to serve my country and to have a little small hand in making our country's education system a little bit better and more of service to America's students. And I was so honored to be there, and I couldn't have been more disillusioned or discouraged by what I saw and experienced when I was in DC. And I saw these two extremes. On one hand, there were people who were um they were hostile. They had sharp elbows. They were willing to,
Yes.
like, step on anyone to get ahead. And those people exist not just in politics, they exist in
Everywhere.
elementary school classroom. They exist in workplaces of all sorts. They exist on movie sets. I know I want to hear more about the film adaptation of your work. But also I saw it and I like knew to stay away from those people.
Yeah.
They were not safe. But there was another contingent of people, and I thought these were my people. They were polished and poised and polite. But these are the
Mm.
people who would smile and flatter me and others one moment and then stab us in the back the next. And this terrified me because one thing my mom had said growing up was that manners were important. They were outward expressions of our inward character. And I'm like, okay, great. Manners and polish are a shortcut to character and inner, integrity and trustworthiness. And that, in fact, is like a long-standing tradition, especially in the American context. There was this whole proliferation of manners handbooks, especially during the Industrial Revolution. As people moved off farms and into cities, all of a sudden you didn't have family reputation and generations of history with other families in the community to go by. And there
Huh.
was this explosion of manners handbooks because this was like a shortcut to character. You're all of a sudden in an anonymous city with meeting hundreds, thousands of other people every day. How do you know if you can trust them? It's like manners were the way. They were that shortcut to character. That the polished, person is someone that you could trust and do business with. Fun. I'm going on so many tangents, but these are really
No, I
fun for me
love
to
that.
tell.
I
Like
didn't know
these
that. Hmm.
well, it's funny because there was a whole genre of con artist that
Oh, I bet.
emerged from this
Yes.
this in this season of history where all of a sudden people thought, okay, you're
Yeah.
dressed well, you present well, you know the right manners, you read the right books, I can trust you.
Yeah.
And the emergence of the confidence man through
Hmm.
Americans for a loop. It's in fact confidence man is where we get our phrase con artist or con man from. It's a
Interesting.
so the confident man was a guy who would approach you on the street and say, "Oh, hello, hello, my good fellow. How are you today? How's the wife? How are the kids?" And just pretend to know you, this perfectly polished stranger you've never met before in your life, but you're like so flattered that they're talking
Yes.
to you. They would stop you on the street, they'd ask you how you're doing, and you'd be like, "Oh, great. How about you?" Like you're just like kind
Yeah.
of adapting in the moment. And
Yeah.
then they'd say, "Okay, well, have a great day." And they'd be off with your wallet or your pocket
Oh my
watch.
God.
It was like
Oh
that
my.
really threw people. They're like,
Yeah.
but wait, they were so beautiful and presentable and like,
Um,
uh knew all the right manners. Like how did that happen? But it was a ruse. It was a guise. They're like Latter-day charlatans, people that have the polish, they have the technique, the manners, etiquette, but not the substance, not that inner character. And so there's a whole that's a really fascinating kind of season of American history, the role of manners and the countercultural thing of confidence, man, like being free riders on that
yeah.
system of trust and adaptive behavior. So anyway, I
But
encountered
also
my
going
own
back,
kind
I
of
just
latter-day
want to
con
say one thing
artists.
because you
Yeah,
had such a good point about. So I'm from New York and moving to DC. There is a southern. It's not the South, but it kind of is, and there's a little bit of a bless your heart feeling in
totally.
DC. where it's like, oh, you look so beautiful, or oh, you say, and you can't really trust always what people are saying or their intentions.
Right.
And there's a lot of, um, I've noticed here more than New York or other places at like a cocktail party, people will be looking over your head to see who the more important person is to talk to. And that is, I mean, that's a ridiculous part of our culture. And I think a lot of it's in Washington of, it's not about money, it's about relationships. I guess they lead to money, but I think it's much more about power and influence in Washington, and it's who can get that for you. And it's interesting that your mom's work inspired you, but also sounds like served as a bit of a warning to you that some people's intentions are just phony. Like you can have
Right.
good manners because you want to welcome people and be kind, or you can be doing it
Yes.
to manipulate people, right?
That's right. That's right. I mean, in Shakespeare's Othello, he writes, "One may smile, smile, and be a villain." Iago is the core villain of Othello, and the whole time he's like pretending to be Othello's best friend, and his, acting in his best interest, and the whole time he's lying and deceiving poor Othello and his wife Desdemona, and just cause untold
Yeah.
pain and suffering and another, I call this the Hannibal Lecter problem. Like Hannibal Lecter is this great villain from
Yeah.
cinematographic history, where he is so sophisticated and refined and has sketches of Florence and listens to Vivaldi while flaying people alive, like, or the Bond villain, right? So
Yes.
polished and suave, but like planning world domination simultaneously. It's the book of Samuel in the Hebrew Bible says, man looks at outward appearance and only the Lord looks at the heart. And it's true. There's this foundational information asymmetry in human life. Like we will never know someone's heart. We only have what they do, what they say, how they look to go off of. But I love this definition of character. Character is habit long continued. So pay attention more to how people act over time, and that
Mhm.
reveals their true character, not just how they look, not just what they say, but actually what they do. People's lives are
Mhm.
often their arguments and illuminate their inner feelings, their inner dispositions, their inner motivations long term.
And did you learn that from your mom? I mean, how did she influence your work now or anybody in your life? Is there anyone you can point to, even a writer or a great thinker who's inspired you to do this work? Who would you point to?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is amazing. She definitely charted her own path, and that's something I'm doing now. She was an entrepreneur. She is so creative. She's always churning out new books, new ideas, and just both her and my father were excellent models of that life of the mind for me, and getting lost in thought and lost in a project, and really delighting in that creative process and bringing it to life.
Mhm.
And so really grateful to her for modeling that for me, modeling how to question norms and proprieties. There's this funny yeah, and my grandmother as well. Let's talk about her. She
Yeah.
was my mom's mom. If scientists were to create from scratch the world's best Mary Kay saleswoman, they would have created my grandmother. She's just like the extroverted extrovert. Like she's never met a stranger. She loved selling all the things. Like if it wasn't Mary Kay, and she was
It
excellent at Mary
was?
Kay. There,
Oh, I
no,
thought you were being sarcastic. She actually
no,
did some.
she actually sell Mary Kay. Oh, there were three pink Cadillacs in my grandmother's driveway growing up from her and my mom. And my mom there's four girls in total. So yes,
Wow.
but she also sold, basically all the things, and it was always just an excuse to like talk to people. She just loved an excuse to like
Yeah.
just build connections, and both her and my mom, yeah, never met a stranger. Both of them are the kind of people who would sit next to someone on an airplane, share a car
Mhm.
home with them, and then they would show up at our Christmas family dinner or Thanksgiving, and there was, just above and beyond hospitable, maybe even sometimes to a fault, if that's possible. I do think it is. Like
Mhm.
one time I remember growing up, my mother, I broke up with a guy I was seeing, and my mom still invited him to Thanksgiving. And he showed up, and I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Your mom invited me." And I'm like, "Mom, like seriously? Like, come on, have a little like, sense of boundary." And she's like, "I like him. He's a nice guy." I'm like, "Mom, like, come on."
Oh
So
my
very
God.
hospitable, maybe even to a fault.
Yeah.
And, my grandmother in particular was excellent at maximizing every human interaction. She felt a great sense of the sacredness of the human person and
Mm.
just what a gift every interaction was.
Oh,
And of course, her faith informed that. And, she would just approach people with such a gravity and seriousness and joy. They'd be like, "What's going on? Like, does
yeah.
this woman want something from me?" And so she kind of off put some people with like her zeal for other human
Mhm.
beings. But far more than that, she blessed people,
Oh,
just knowing how to make them feel seen and known and loved in the fullness of who they are. My mom, for example, is something of a polyglot. She can say hello to people and sing like basic children's songs in like 40 different languages. And she's pretty
wow.
good at just like, so this is an interesting illumination of the distinction between civility and politeness. Politeness, again, is manners, etiquette, technique. It's what we do, it's what we say. Civility is an inner disposition of the heart that respects people and goes, maybe even risks violating rules of propriety to respect the dignity, humanity of others, to make them feel seen and known and loved. And so my mother does something that is maybe not considered PC sometimes. And like,
Mhm.
she'll see someone who she thinks like looks like they're from the Philippines. So she'll say kamustika, like that's racial
Yeah.
profiling. But
Right.
when people hear this tall, blonde, beautiful woman say, hello and greet them in their native tongue, they're like, what? Their mind like explodes and they just light up and they just feel such joy and they're so honored. I've seen this happen dozens and
Wow.
dozens of times. But to her, you know, that risk of being impolite or impropriety is worth it. That's true civility, and she never misses, and so she's incredible, going above and beyond, doing the crazy thing to show hospitality in that way,
Mm.
intellectually and emotionally, practically. And so both my mother and my grandmother were great examples to me of that.
And how I love that, by the way, because you are putting yourself out there. There is a certain is your mom from the South? Because there's a certain geographical. I have some Southern friends who are much more open than I'm from the Northeast. And that would be, there's a vulnerability to doing that because you think, oh, if I go up to somebody and approach them and I turn them off, you're putting yourself out there and your ego on the line a little bit. It sounds like your mom didn't mind. Because I'm sure sometimes people were like taken aback when she greeted them in their native language or whatever. And you just have to keep going.
Totally. And you know, sometimes when people were off put or skeptical, or even when people responded brusquely, like, brush
Yeah.
my grandmother, brush my mother off. Like another thing they taught me, we're so quick. I am very quick to tell stories of condemnation. Someone cuts me off, someone's a jerk at the coffee shop, whatever it is.
Totally.
I am so quick to be judge, jury, and executioner in
Totally.
those instances and be like, that is a bad human being, and just like make this referendum on the
Yeah.
sum total of who they are based on one snippet of an interaction with them. And my mom and grandma, they both are. My grandmother is no longer with us. She passed away in 2020, right before the pandemic, and
Mm.
actually had like, almost 1,000 people turn out to her funeral. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But
Oh,
they were excellent and they modeled this for me, telling stories not of condemnation like I do, tend to do, but stories of exoneration. That person, probably has a sick relative or they're going through a
yeah.
divorce or their child acted out. And like, this is more about them and where they are than about me. And they were excellent at doing something, Socrates said this as well, that that viciousness, cruelty, and justice is sickness of the soul. And people who are
Mm.
vicious and cruel and unjust, they don't deserve our hate. They deserve our compassion because they are sick and making themselves sicker by hurting those around them with their injustice. And my grandmother was so good at that. She was like, I'm not going to make their lives more difficult than they are already. Whereas I'm like justice, I'm like destroy,
Yes.
you know, like
Yes.
social justice in the moment. I have a inner, Larry David in me, and he's
Yes.
everyone's inner ego and
Me
inner
too.
id. I want to talk to you about, adaptation of screenwriting, because I really think Larry David needs to unretire from Curb Your Enthusiasm and bring me on as a writer, because I have dozens of little vignettes of, scenes that I would love to see be made into shows and future. I've got like 10 more seasons laid out. I'm excited for it. I know that'll happen one day. I'm gonna share it for Tina to
Yeah,
manifest that.
yeah. I will add some stories to that. How do you pass this on to your kids, or how are you going to pay this forward to people, the lessons that you learned from your mom, from your grandmother? What are you working to build with the civic renaissance, and how are you kind of seeing this in 10 years time, what you're doing? Like, what's your hope?
Well, my children are my most important calling, my most important vocation. I love what I do. I love partnering with leaders to
Yeah.
build renaissances, to build flourishing across difference in their own community. And yet, I know that my children are my most important work. Raising good human beings is my most important legacy, and the most powerful way that I can make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So, how am I actually doing that? Very imperfectly. I am impatient and get frustrated all the
Yeah.
time with my kids. And, my hope is that modeling not perfection, but grace for myself and grace for them and grace for
Mm,
others, and that fluency with forgiveness and self compassion, compassion for others, like that's a legacy and gift that I can give them, because we're in an era right now that is so exacting and ruthless and totalizing, that we see one person and we want to define them by one thing, and they're
yes.
either good or evil. Like it's so zero sum. And in
Yes.
fact, we are so complex, every single one of us, and part of civility and civic renaissance as this very humanistic project, helping us appreciate the gift of being human in ourselves and others. I mean, it requires having an accurate understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And my favorite definition of the human condition comes from Blaise Pascal. He is my favorite French philosopher, inventor, one of my favorite thinkers. He was an absolute genius. And in his book, The Pensée, he talks about the human condition as the greatness and wretchedness of man. We
Mm,
we are both, and every single one of us. We are neither
yeah.
good or bad, but we are each equally as capable and predisposed to commit untold harm and evil towards ourselves, towards other human beings in the
Mm-hmm.
world, or greatness.
Yeah.
Pascal was a theist. He believed humankind was the pinnacle of the created world. And one of my favorite civic renaissance humanists, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what civic renaissance humanism was. It was the second wave of humanism during the Italian Renaissance. The first
Mm.
wave was like very intellectual. It was very cerebral, ivory tower. It was focused on
Mm-hmm.
translations of Petrarch and antiquity. Petrarch translated Cicero and other ancient Greco-Roman writers, and made them not just literally, didn't just translate them literally, but made them culturally relevant. And that was like just a whole like explosion of reinvigoration of antiquity and reviving it for the needs of the present. And civic renaissance took that a step further, the second wave, and said, okay, let's not just be content translating it and like thinking about it, its relevance,
Yeah.
but let's like live it. And it was an application of this lost cadre of wisdom, cache of wisdom to art and architecture and statecraft.
Mm.
And it was just this proliferation of human ingenuity and beauty. And I just got back from Florence a few weeks ago, and just like every step, you're just immersed in like, and it wasn't just, this is the interesting thing, it wasn't just one person. There were important people throughout the Renaissance, like Petrarch had his place. The Medici family had its place, but they weren't the Medici weren't the only wealthy patrons of artists. They
Right.
that of course they were important here, but like, and they were just it was just this unbelievable moment of social coordination where people were on the same page. They're like, we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, and we're
Yes.
going to build beauty and greatness and celebrate human ingenuity. And so I mentioned that because Pico della Mirandola, he was a humanist who wrote this beautiful oration on the dignity of man, where he says, what is man? He's the crowning jewel of creation, a little lower than the angels, above plants and animals. And he said the same thing, capable of greatness, wretchedness. Free
Mhm.
will was for Pico, this defining attribute of what it meant to be human. And
Mm.
I love that. So you mentioned, what does success look like 10 years from now?
Yeah.
It looks like leaders having a greater sense of agency and ownership over their
Mm.
role in making the world better. The one question I get over and over and over again, criticisms of me, criticisms of my work, is that it's useless. It doesn't matter because nothing
Mm.
will ever change as long as this person is in leadership or as long as
Yeah.
this party is in power. And I'm like, do you have any idea how disempowering that is? Like we have way more power than we realize. Own it. And
Mm.
that's one thing that
Yeah.
my grandmother taught me. Like we are very aware of generational trauma and vicious
Yes.
cycles. These stories of one person making bad decisions that hurt people across time and place. And yet, just as true, but insufficiently realized, is that the opposite is also powerful. That one person's um, composure, grace can have a legacy across time and place,
Yeah.
and bring beauty across generations. And I call this the mellifluous echo of the magnanimous soul. And the magnanimous soul is an idea we get from Aristotle of a person that is so self possessed and composed that they can be utterly self forgetful in the marketplace of life. And that was my grandmother's. I share with you that she was a Mary Kay saleswoman. She would put herself to
Yes.
get herself together in the morning and, perfectly coiffed hair and makeup. And then she would completely forget herself and be totally focused on others the rest of the day. She would maximize every human interaction, treating every person she met as a sacred and profound gift. No one was utilitarian to her. It
Mhm.
wasn't just it was not just a clerk at the grocery store or a barista at the coffee shop. Like she made people feel seen and known and loved. Zeal for human interaction. And,
Mm.
she led her life that way and raised her 5 children, 4 daughters to raise
Yep.
to live that way as well. And they raised all of us. There's now 20 plus grandchildren, and I have my own children now. And so
Yeah.
her legacy is not just in her lifespan. Like she's no longer with us, and yet we continue to see the fruits of her life. And we will never fully know this side of eternity, the good and beauty that she brought during her
Mm.
all too short time on
Mm.
earth. And there's an element of humility and faith and hope to that. Like, that there is the things that we do won't we don't know the effect of it, but we have more power than we realize to put into play a sequence of events that hurts people or that helps them. And my grandmother remains an inspiration to me for again, she embodies this idea, the mellifluous echo of the magnanimous soul, that one magnanimous soul can put into place a mellifluous echo that reverberates
Mm.
across time and place, bringing beauty and joy far beyond our direct involvement. And there's power in that. And so I would love to see a whole generation of leaders, those that I work with and the leaders that they in turn train in their own communities, to live according to that otherworldly logic, to live
Mm.
with that long game in mind, to think in decades, to think in generations.
Yeah.
Um,
And not seek that credit, which I think the human nature,
that's
as you
right.
said, human nature hasn't changed over
That's right.
time. And most people do seek credit for their work. And
Right.
you look throughout history, and I wrote a book about women in history who have been overlooked. And some of the most incredible women I had never heard of before, but what they did was this kind of quiet, um, they lived their life in such a way that it left a profound impact, even if we don't know it. Like it led to Dr.
Totally.
Mary Edwards Walker was a surgeon during the Civil War and a spy for the Union Army, the only woman to be given the Medal of Honor, which is shocking because 3,000
Mm.
people in it. And it was taken
Wow.
away from her um, decades after she got it while she was still alive, and she wore it the rest of her life. But my point being that I think she was an example that might have pushed us toward the 19th Amendment, right? There are those people that just quietly lead their lives and make a huge impact.
Yes.
And I think you're really hopeful. It sounds to me like you're a hopeful philosopher almost about what we can do, and how also specifically I think you exude a lot of confidence. Is that something that your grandmother and your mother taught you? And that, I think especially in DC, you go into rooms that are male dominated, and you're in a male dominated field of philosophy and writing. We both are as historians. Like, does that impact you? How were you able to move past that feeling of imposter syndrome that I think many of us have?
Yeah, I've never really struggled with imposter syndrome, and my mother
Amazing.
and grandmother didn't either. And like, I'm not as good as they are, but like, my grandmother, she would see people whispering, and whereas others or even me might be like, oh, are they gossiping
Yeah,
about me? Like, do
yeah,
something. She would say to herself, oh, they're probably planning a party for me. Like that was her reframe of the moment. Like same facts. What we would do is different than what she would do. Like they're,
yeah.
they're probably doing planning a party for me. So funny. And like, oh my word, like
Oh my
unbelievable
God.
unearned confidence. Like I'll tell you, and my mom and grandmother, like I'll tell you a story. One day my mom did a study abroad type experience in the Philippines. She really does love the Philippines. And, there was this public event where the prime minister of the Philippines or president, oh, forgive me, prime minister, the leader of the
Yeah,
Philippines
yeah.
was there. And she said to herself, the prime minister, they probably want to meet me, so she
It's
just
for
walked
me.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just walked up and introduced herself to the prime minister or the president, and
Oh my
and
God.
again in perfect Tagalog, right? And so again, this
Yeah,
tall, blonde, beautiful woman approaching
yeah.
you and said, speaking your language, and of course she got invited to like the parties after, and was like in with the political elite in the Philippines, and it's like who does that? No one does that, but
Yeah,
but she did, and she's has a whole litany of amazing stories of just that confidence. Worst thing that people can do is say no and brush you off, but the upside's
yeah.
pretty fun if you if
I
you know to
really
risk it.
love that. We could talk forever, but I do want to ask you one question that I love. Rachel Martin's Wild Card on NPR, and I don't know if you are familiar with it, but she literally just picks questions from a stack of cards and asks people she's interviewing. And one of the questions is, what's a piece of advice you were smart to ignore? Did anybody
Mm,
ever tell you, for instance, people don't want to hear this right now? I'm sure many people have said
yeah,
to you.
yeah, especially when um I wanted to write my book, and I, was 23 years old, had just left a very painful experience in government. And I spoke with agents, I spoke with editors, I spoke with people in media. And there were two pieces of advice I got. One was from David Brooks, a conversation I had with David
Mm.
Brooks like right after I got out of government. He goes, oh, you want to write a book? Get on television. Like that was like the most important thing. And I didn't follow that advice, because to get on television, you have to be willing to say things that I didn't want to say. You have to be able to be willing, you have to want to, and I'm not, it's not my
Totally.
personality to just I'm sure I could, like I'm good, I'm happy to talk, but like to pontificate on things I didn't actually care about or have
Sure.
well-informed strong thoughts about. And so that just felt disingenuous to me. So I didn't do that. Another piece of advice I got early on from an agent was um get a co-author, write find someone famous to like write this book with
Yeah.
you. And I didn't want to do that, and they told me that was the only way I'd be able to get published, and I didn't want to do that because these were my ideas,
Yeah.
and I there was no one I wanted to co-author with, no one I inherently thought would like make the end product better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I didn't want to compromise the product, and it was
Good
my
for you.
project that I had to like
Yeah.
overcome. And so those yeah, people are very quick to give
Yeah.
lots of advice, and maybe it was like a little bit of my mom and me, and
Good for
but
you.
no, this is my project, I'm gonna own
Yeah.
it.
I love that. And your ideas are very specific to you. You're not writing a book of like ancient Roman history or something where you could potentially, but the whole ethos of what you're saying is new and specific to you and your
That's
thoughts
right.
and your ideas. And why try to, carve up that pie and give some of it to someone else? Um, I think that I would just say, is there anything you still think that when you meet somebody, you still think you need to prove when you meet someone? Or do you feel like, again, your grandmother and your mom have kind of imbued you with this sense that you don't need to prove anything to anyone? Because I think as a writer and as a creator and a storyteller, there is what is interesting to me might not be interesting to other people, right? And there is that feeling of you want people's to be engaged. You want people to be engaged with your work, and you also want them to trust you as the storyteller. And do you feel like when you meet people, any sense of having to convince them that what you're saying is important right now? Civility right now is important, even though it seems like this impossible thing. It really does feel pretty impossible. Not in interpersonal relationships, but on the political global stage, right? There are no rewards for people being kind to each other on the global stage. I mean,
Mm.
it's a very difficult thing to say right now, but I think in the long term there are. Being kind always matters. So I guess my question is, yeah, do you feel like there's a lot of people who are cynical about what you're discussing?
Yes, tons of cynicism. No, I have nothing to prove in any
Good.
conversation. And, my mom and grandmother, like, for all their virtues, I think looking back, I do have some critiques that a lot of their worldview, whether it was their faith or their outlook on life and success, was kind of like bumper sticker Sunday school
Yeah.
platitudes, like, and like it didn't really penetrate deeper, but like there's a virtue in that. And so for example, one thing that comes to mind when you said, "Do I ever feel like I have something to prove when I meet someone?"
Yeah.
What my mom and grandma always said growing up, maybe, and this probably comes from Mary Kay herself, like who wrote all these self help books, like
Yeah.
where one thing Mary Kay said, they always attributed this to her, was like, every person you meet, be less focused on what you have to prove, and like pretend that they have a big invisible sign that says make me feel special, and like focus on them. And another thing they would say is like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And they're really good at that. My mom and grandma are really good at like, asking questions and focusing
Yeah.
on others and making it less about you and like what you want out of the interaction, and more about just earnestly having a curiosity and getting to know
Yeah.
people.
Oh,
And so that instructive, and yes, nothing, yes to cynicism, no, nothing to prove.
I love that. I really do. Your mom and grandma. Is your mom still
She
with?
is, yes.
Oh, great. She must be really proud of the work that you're doing. I mean, you can
Oh,
talk.
she's great. She's my number one fan. She has been so helpful. Really grateful to her. She's come with me. I've been in like 160 cities and 5 countries on book tour and working with leaders and sharing these ideas. And and my kids have been with me, 2, now 3 children with me for a lot of that. So really grateful to her for that support.
Well, thank you so much. I would love to talk to you again in the future. I think you have a lot of wisdom to share and a lot of history to impart. I usually focus on American history, so hearing about what Greek and Roman and all these ancient philosophers and how they relate to today, I think is really unique. You've really tapped into something unique and special. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for teaching me what Substack Live is. So maybe we'll do it again sometime. We should do it again. Maybe I'll do it again on my own sometime. I've
I
never
would,
didn't even know this was a thing.
yeah. So you normally tape things and post them. It's
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
kind of like anti I wouldn't say technophobe, just like not tech savvy. So it's like
Mhm.
whatever I've
Yeah.
done once, that tends to be the thing that I do. Like things have to find me. Like you found me with this Substack Live thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not tech savvy either, so I'm just glad we could pull this off.
yeah, we did it.
And thank you to anyone who joined us, and hopefully we will talk again soon, Alexandra. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.